I've just come back from Malta, where I spent a week visiting the island's mysterious megalithic ruins. And by the end of this video, you'll realise that the accepted timeline of Malta's ancient history simply doesn't make sense. And I'll share a new update that suggests Malta's story is far older and more mysterious than we could have ever imagined. Hi guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Michael. I have a degree in ancient history, and on this channel we discuss the unexplainable mysteries of our past. Let's get into it.
There's some pretty big blocks. We need to start with the mainstream view of Malta's history. The orthodox timeline says that the first humans arrived on the islands during the Neolithic, around 5900 BC. These people were early farmers who mostly lived in caves. However, this period of habitation didn't last, and factors such as climate change led to the islands becoming too dry to sustain agriculture, and thus the Maltese archipelago once again became uninhabited for another 1000 years. But then, a second wave of colonization arrived around 3850 BC. It is this culture to which mainstream archaeology attributes all the magnificent temple building we see today.
However, this is where things stop making sense. Somehow, this group of people, supposedly a tiny island population of early farmers, with no wheel, no metal tools, and no writing, suddenly, practically overnight, developed incredible skills in megalithic construction.
Let's take the largest megalithic site, Gigantea, as an example. Gigantea was apparently constructed only 200 years after humans first repopulated the islands. But it's an astoundingly impressive project. Some of the stones weigh over 50 tons, yet these massive megaliths were quarried, precisely cut, transported and perfectly aligned without metal tools, without even draft animals to pull the stones. I mean, look at the size of some of these blocks. It's estimated the temple was over 25 feet tall, but how did they lift these stones so high? The complex is also astronomically aligned with the winter solstice, implying the builders had an observational understanding of solar cycles, which is incredible, considering the sheer infancy of their civilization and the lack of written language for architectural design. The temple also suggests centralized planning, organized labor, and motivations powerful enough to mobilize an entire society, yet all of this was supposedly achieved in just 200 years? It makes zero sense to me that a population could develop this level of sophistication in such a tiny time frame. I mean, where are the precursors? Where is the slow build-up of technology and ideas, the trial and error? You'd expect to see cruder efforts, the development of skills, not immediately jumping to such impressive construction at the very beginning of their civilization.
To put it simply, if the mainstream view is to be believed, then this leap represents the fastest development of construction technology and societal organization ever seen in human history, and it simply doesn't make sense.
And it's not like they could have brought these ideas with them. Even with its accepted date, Gigantea is by far the oldest megalithic site in the Mediterranean, and was the oldest on Earth until the discovery of the even more mysterious Göbekli Tepe in Turkey.
So how did this culture go from zero to master engineers, builders, and astronomers in only 200 years? In my opinion, that just doesn't make sense. But it doesn't stop there.
The orthodox view claims that over the next 1000 years in total, this culture were absolutely prolific in their temple building, somehow building at least 30 megalithic temple sites all across the tiny Maltese islands. This is an entirely new site roughly every 33 years, and that's only the ones we've discovered. There could be more. So why did this culture appear, immediately begin constructing astoundingly impressive megalithic temples, consistently pumping one out every few decades, and then suddenly disappear with no sign of conquest or war? Why did they need to build so many temples so soon after one another? And how did a tiny island population have the resources and the ability to achieve this? You'd think Malta was simply too small to sustain the necessary civilization that could develop the enormously sophisticated construction techniques found in the temples, and we see no evidence for the large-scale domestic agriculture that surely would have been needed to support the people who achieve this. So how does any of this make sense?
Let's take a look at some of these sites to show just how remarkable they are.
Of the roughly 30 temples, 7 are officially recognized as UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Hypogeum, dated 100 years or so after Gigantea, is jaw-dropping. One megalith at the complex weighs an estimated 57 tons. This is the equivalent of around 40 family cars. Many others weigh over 20 tons. Again, we see precise astronomical astrological alignment. During the summer solstice, sunlight passes perfectly through a hole and lights up a stone slab inside the temple. This isn't luck, it's astronomy with mathematical precision baked into the architecture. Nearby Menadra is dated to the same period. Again, we see impossibly massive megaliths and precise astronomy. The south temple is aligned so that the sun enters on the spring equinox, the autumn equinox, the summer solstice, and the winter solstice.
That is no easy feat. That's geometry, math, engineering, and astronomy all combined to create a cosmic calendar built in stone. Yet their civilization developed all of this in only a couple of centuries?
Toxtien, dated a few hundred years later, is arguably even more impressive. This is a complex of 4 interconnected temples, featuring detailed spiral carvings and animal reliefs, beautifully worked into the stone. Toxtien is where they found the famous Fat Lady figurines, about 2.5 meters tall if complete and perfectly carved. We see huge megalithic doorways, curved chambers, precisely fitted huge blocks, and it was supposedly 6 meters high, again raising the question of how they managed to lift these extraordinarily heavy stones. They were building multi-roomed stone structures with massive walls taller than the average person, using no mortar, no cranes, and no metal tools. It's incredible.
Then there's arguably the most impressive construction on the islands, the mysterious Hypogeum.
The Hypogeum is a multi-level subterranean structure carved directly into solid limestone. It has 3 levels, and the deepest reaches about 12 meters underground. This is deeper than most modern subway systems. This architecture has no known precedent, and is dated to the very beginning of this culture's arrival on Malta. So how did they immediately have the skill to build such a project? And is this really possible with stone chisels? Even more mysteriously, some of the chambers are carved to create an acoustic resonance effect. A voice used at a frequency of 110 Hz resonates throughout the entire underground complex, creating a powerful, vibrating echo that can be felt as much as heard. This acoustic phenomenon is thought to have induced trance-like states or altered consciousness, but it again begs the question, how were they so sophisticated as to achieve this right at the beginning of their civilization? To add to the mystery, some human remains found here were skulls with unusual elongation and cranial features. Don't panic, I'm not going to claim they're aliens, but it adds to the mystery all the same.
So how do we account for the presence of these astounding megalithic constructions with no architectural antecedents, no civilizational build-up, and no evidence of large-scale agriculture? Is archaeology sure about these dates? Well, let's now take a look at the science used to date the temples.
The primary method used to date the megalithic temples of Malta is radiocarbon dating. Archaeologists date organic material like charcoal, bone, or plant remains found in or near the temple layers. The amount of carbon-14 left in the material tells scientists how long it's been since the organism died. At Malta's temples, however, only a few radiocarbon samples have been taken, and crucially, only from on top of or around the megaliths, not beneath.
This is a key distinction. If these samples were taken from beneath the stones, it would prove that the stones were placed on top of and crucially after the organic material was deposited. However, only having dates from on or around the megaliths doesn't really prove their age. The temples could have already been there.
Archaeologists also analyze pottery styles, tools, and figurines. Much of the pottery found at these sites has been cross-dated with other Mediterranean sites at the accepted date. But again, just because pottery was found from this period doesn't prove that this was when the temples were constructed. It just proves that people lived here at this time. There's no reason to suggest the culture responsible for the pottery couldn't have found these sites already there, inherited them, and used them in their own society. On top of this, some geologists have raised eyebrows at the extent of erosion on certain structures, especially temples like Menadra, Hypogeum, and Gigantea. Some megaliths show signs of deep weathering, including rounded edges, pitted surfaces, and extensive limestone flaking. Critics argue this level of erosion would typically take much longer than 6,000 years, especially considering Malta's relatively dry climate.
So once you realise that there are no radiocarbon dates from beneath the megaliths, and that the erosion points to these quarried stones being much older, the mainstream dating of these complexes starts to look less secure. Add to this the improbable timeline of civilizational development and the complete lack of evidence for large-scale agriculture, and some serious questions start to emerge.
It seems to me that the only reason these temples are dated to this period is that they can't be dated any earlier without rewriting the established timeline of human civilization. But the evidence pointing to this date of construction is limited at best, and the developmental timeline is nonsensical.
So that raises the question, what if these temples, this megalithic culture, was older. Well, for this to be feasible, then there would need to be older human presence on the island. But is this even possible?
Well, it's not just possible, it's arguably been proved. In a groundbreaking new discovery announced last week, archaeologists discovered cooked fish and deer bones, along with other organic and human-made materials, indicating that humans inhabited Malta well before the arrival of the Neolithic farmers. Extensive testing confirmed that these remains are at least 8,500 years old, possibly 9,000, pushing back the timeline of human activity on the islands by a millennium. Not only does this rewrite Malta's prehistory, it also opens the door for human presence on the islands going back much further.
But there's more.
A 1917 discovery of a human tooth in the Kar Dalam cave has sparked renewed interest after modern analysis suggested it may belong to a Neanderthal. Researchers from the Natural History Museum in London identified traits unique to Neanderthal teeth. If confirmed through DNA testing, this would push back human presence in Malta by around 30,000 years and suggest that Neanderthals once inhabited the island.
Now, obviously these aren't Homo sapiens, but if Neanderthals could reach these islands, there's nothing to suggest Homo sapiens couldn't either. But how could these early humans have possibly got here?
Well, Malta wasn't always an island. During the last ice age, sea levels were over 100 meters lower than they are today, exposing vast stretches of land that are now submerged. Malta was connected to Sicily, making it accessible to migrating humans and animals. Then, as the last ice age ended and glaciers melted around 11,000 years ago, rising seas gradually cut Malta off, turning it into the isolated island we know today.
But if Neanderthals could have migrated across this land bridge, then why couldn't Homo sapiens?
If true, this would completely rewrite human history on Malta and would put the accepted dates of the megalithic construction into serious jeopardy. If humans were on the islands before the end of the last ice age, before the islands even became islands, it would change everything.
For example, some of the most unexplainable mysteries of Malta would start to make more sense. I can't believe I got this far into the video without mentioning cart ruts, but let's get into this now.
One of Malta's most baffling mysteries is the network of ancient parallel lines etched into the island's limestone. There is no agreed explanation for them. They're clearly man-made, carved deep into the rock, sometimes up to almost a meter deep, and they crisscross the island in strange overlapping patterns. Were they used for transport? Possibly, but we have no idea what kind of vehicle or sledge could have created such consistent grooves, or why they run so deep. And remember, this civilization wasn't supposed to have the wheel. Some ruts even mysteriously run straight off cliffs and continue underwater, stretching for hundreds of meters beneath the sea.
The fact they head off under the ocean is especially baffling. Why would the ancient builders want to do this, and how? Well, perhaps they weren't underwater when they were carved. Perhaps they were carved much earlier when sea levels were lower.
This links to the mystery of the underwater temples, structures off the coast of Malta that some researchers believe may be ancient megalithic sites, now submerged. Divers have reported formations that resemble large stone blocks arranged in unnatural patterns, possibly foundations or walls. Mainstream archaeology disputes this, suggesting they might be natural, but others argue that the symmetry and alignment point to human construction. If they are man-made, and it's an if, it would mean temples or settlements were built before the end of the last ice age, when sea levels were far lower, placing their origin more than 10,000 years ago, long before Malta's known temple builders.
But if we consider the possibility that humans could have been on the islands before the sea level rose, this starts to make a bit more sense. What if the megalithic construction on Malta is much, much older and dates back all the way to the last ice age?
Something else pointing to this earlier date is the alignment of the temples. The temples all across the Maltese islands are pointed in different, seemingly random directions. This is odd for religious sites, which typically align with consistent markers. However, researchers Georgia Gaius and Frank Ventura found that their axes are not random, but exactly correspond to the rising and setting points of the star Sirius over thousands of years. Due to the precession of the equinoxes, a slow wobble of Earth's axis, Sirius's position on the horizon shifts over millennia. This suggests that the temples were constructed over a span of nearly 5,000 years, from around 9,150 BC to 4,250 BC, each aligned to Sirius's position at the time. Now, this could be a coincidence, but it would be a pretty remarkable one, considering it matches every single temple. We also know for a fact that the temple builders used astronomy in their construction. The problem is that this alignment puts the beginning of the temple phase at 11,000 years ago, way earlier than is accepted, and at the time the sea levels were lower.
Now, this date of 11,000 years ago is, I'm sure, very interesting to many of you, as it aligns perfectly with Göbekli Tepe, the Younger Dryas, Plato's description of Atlantis, and many other aspects of the increasingly popular popular theory for a lost civilization of the Ice Age. Now, what I've said in this video is by no means proof of this, but I do think that the accepted timeline of Malta's ancient history doesn't make sense. But what do you think? Please let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like or subscribing to my channel. Peace!